Dr. Nathan Wray. Is a technical lead and senior operator at the Advanced Cyber Operations team. That's under the Office of the Director of Operational Test and Evaluation, which a lot of us here in IDA support as well. He has a doctorate in cybersecurity and has over a decade of red teaming experience over a wide variety of technologies. So take it away.
Thank you. So I'm Nathan Wray. This is Sean Phipps. We will
get my own microphone.
He's the professional doctor wrangler, so if you hear me rambling, he will stop me. So, okay. So, before we get started, how many of you are familiar with Cobalt Strike? Anybody know? It's okay. Good. Awesome. So, we'll go ahead and dive right in.
So, one of the problems that we run into, or that we have been running into lately, is that our cyber defenders are being sent to commercial training to learn how to do cyber defense. And so what they teach you to do in those classes is to do stuff like upload things that you find to VirusTotal, because that'll help you do analysis on it. So without doing the proper deconfliction during like red team exercises and adversarial assessments and other things, this can and has happened with red team payloads. So in the process of conducting assessments or exercises, stuff is getting sent up to VirusTotal, which then that gets spread across multiple different platforms, and potentially sensitive information about systems that are being targeted or TTPs that the red teams are using are then potentially exposed on the internet, and that's not ideal. Yeah.
Can we take this one?
Yeah.
Okay. So, because we've had experiences on our operations where defenders have uploaded beacons and payloads to VirusTotal, we were tasked with, okay, let's figure out what an adversary could find by analyzing that payload. We sort of already had an idea because, they're already out there. The information got shared across multiple platforms, so we could see what was there. But we wanted to analyze it ourselves and go through that process. So the overarching research that we did was looking at Cobalt Strike versions 4.8 plus. We'll get into why in a few slides. And then also kind of brought up the question, are we as a DoD red team community doing enough to analyze our cyber tooling? Are we looking enough at our OPSEC of these tools? So, one of the first things I'll take that back. We started analyzing first, and then we realized, hey, we should really reach out to the red teams and see how they're analyzing their tools. It's always fun to jump into the technical deep dive, but so in that, we asked them, how are you analyzing your tools? How are you looking at things? How are you assessing the OPSEC? And, as part of their accreditation process, they have to come up with their own documented policies of how they're going to look at their tools, analyze their tools. And because of that, there's not a common process across the teams. So each team has their own policies and procedures in place. And then depending on the tools, and if it's a major release, a minor release, is it a brand new tool, is it open source, is it closed source, really dictates how they analyze their tools. There could be things with newer versions where they go through an entire assessment process, whereas, we kind of know this tool. We'll just kind of run it through our quick process and call it a day, and we're good to go. And then you have commercial tools, Cobalt Strike, other tools that, hey, they've been around for a decade plus, we're good to go. We'll do it even faster and then push it through their pipeline and be good to go. So essentially the process is, hey, a tool is approved. We've gone through all the justification of what we need to do from that policy side. We could then say, hey, we've gone through that. Let's just go through our reevaluation process. As I just said a minute ago, that process can be less formal. Again, Some tools have blanket approval. They're just able to buy them. They're good to go without any of those authorities or those processes necessarily being as stringently followed. And then, again, with minor revisions, the process may be a little less stringent, a little less formal. Like, hey, yeah, we did our checks. We looked at this piece of the OPSEC, and then that's it. And then a major revision might go through their entire process all over again, or is supposed to.
All right, so for a handful of folks that aren't familiar with Cobalt Strike, just to give you a quick baseline knowledge, Cobalt Strike is a post-exploitation framework. We use it, or the red team community uses it, as an adversarial emulation tool. So both to conduct exploitation of targets and then also to have command and control of those targets once they're exploited. It was first released in 2012. Based on a previous open source project. It was actually developed by a guy who was a National Guardsman or a reservist, I forget at the time. And it's basically become like the ubiquitous tool for red teaming, especially across the DoD. The primary payload that you then upload to a target and it executes and calls you back and gives you that command and control on a target is called a beacon. Over the years, obviously, they've updated it a lot. As Nate mentioned, those tools, or those updates rather, can be sometimes tested, sometimes not. OPSEC is not often a big concern with these tools when they get updated. Usually it's things like evading EDR and security products, which I guess there's an argument to be made for, OPSEC for not getting caught in the first place. But what actually goes into those and what's being put out on the wire, that's not really their problem. So anyway, only recently have teams begin to be aware of this and be concerned about it. So that's kind of what led into this research.
So kind of where we are today, with Cobalt Strike, they have some products available for licensed versions of the software where you can address some of these OPSEC concerns. However, they can be cumbersome, they can be lengthy, challenging to get all the pieces correct in order to properly implement the OPSEC that you're trying to use. And then because the red teams go from mission to mission to mission or operation, there's usually not a lot of downtime in between for them to take these processes and apply them and test them. So it's either they do it on the fly during an operation, which you can run into issues that way, or you just put them on the back burner and you use the tool as is, or you use a lesser subset of that. If, and in some cases when, a beacon is uploaded or caught by antivirus software or uploaded VirusTotal, those protections are usually updated relatively quickly. So if a red team is going against a certain security product, they now have to refactor their infrastructure, their payloads in order to get that to work. And of course, that takes away from important operational time. And then, depending on the site, VirusTotal, et cetera, those beacons could be available to anyone out there with an account or even without an account, which obviously, as we said before, can open up the door to some not so great OPSEC concerns. The one point we want to foot stomp here is that with most C2 or all C2 programs, no matter what obfuscation they're using, what encryption, whatever, at the end of the day, the beacon has to be able to do what it's designed to do, and that is call back to its C2 platform. So in this case, it's always going to be human readable in some format. Essentially it's got to do what it's got to do, and there's no really getting around that. But you can take steps to properly protect your beacons or your payloads.
Yeah, so on that note, then, so there are a bunch of open source tools out there and also paid tools that exist to extend the functionality and capability of Cobalt Strike. to include helping to protect the beacons more better. Some tools are super easy to use, and some are really convoluted. There's even ones which, regardless of how we feel about it, where you actually go and upload your beacon to some company's website, and then they do some things to it behind the scenes that you don't see, and then they send it back to you, and that's your like obfuscated beacon. So, okay, and Cobalt Strike 4.8 came out in February of last year, and they implemented a couple of new features that have made doing some reverse engineering on the beacons and that OPSEC testing that Nate was talking about a little more difficult. The two things that they implemented were guardrails, which allow you to say, hey, I only want my beacon to run on, this host or this network, this domain, when this user's logged in, things like that. It again, gives you some parameters that you can configure so that your beacon doesn't just like go out there and YOLO across the internet. They also introduced multi-byte obfuscation. So before, the obfuscation that it used was a single static byte, or 2 bytes.
Just one.
1 byte. Yeah, thank you. And it was the same all the time, right? So once antivirus programs figured that out, there was no way for Cobalt Strike to get around them. So prior to version 4.8, it used a fixed byte. After 4.8, it uses a 4-byte randomized key. And then after in 4.9, they introduced some more versions of that, other customizations and protections. So following a couple of instances where some of these beacons ended up on VirusTotal, our team was asked to do some in-depth research on the Cobalt Strike beacon and see, hey, what information is actually out there and available to anyone who finds one of these beacons, whether it's a DoD red team or not. We focused on versions 4.8 and newer. There are a lot of open source tools out there already that can go into a beacon 4.7 and earlier, but nothing really out there to work on 4.8. And we identified several key features key pieces of information, including the C2 address that the beacon is meant to call back to, which can potentially expose a red team's infrastructure. Not great. The license key identifier, which is not necessarily attributable back to a certain team, but is a thing that you can then use to track a threat actor or a team across multiple instances of finding that same thing. And then other like target specific information that can give you data, give you some tips or whatever about what the team is targeting. So maybe the domain that they're trying to go to, the users that they're, trying to run against or targeting, the networks that they're in, stuff like that. And the kind of culmination of this research then is we developed a Python script that we can take a Cobalt Strike beacon, throw it into that, and then extract all of that information. And as far as we're aware, maybe I'm getting ahead, but as far as we're aware, no open source tools are doing that yet.
Yeah, as of sometime last month, none of the open source tools have been updated to use that 4-byte key or determine it or find it or whatever. So our script can do that.
Well, that might be.
I can take this one if you want.
Okay.
Okay.
This is kind of what I was just talking about, I guess. I'm getting ahead of myself in the slides. So some of the OPSEC concerns, the possibility of co-opting the infrastructure. So you find a beacon, you're able to pull out the team server that it's calling back to, or the C2 server that it's calling back to. There are open source tools out there that allow you to go and connect to those servers and co-opt them. So that information potentially becomes available. Again, operational tracking or tracking of a threat actor using the key. And then information about the TTPs that a red team is using within Cobalt Strike, which can also tip you off to potentially what adversary they're trying to emulate, which is not great for OPSEC. As Nate mentioned, the beacon at some point has to be in a decrypted in a way that it's doing what it's going to do. It does the thing it's designed to do. So all of this research isn't necessarily focused on hiding that information or protecting that information completely. It's about making informed risk decisions, basically, knowing what it is that you're putting out there on the internet or on these networks, so you can make informed risk decisions.
Yeah, and Sean mentioned this, but as of, it's one thing we had thought about, we had kind of hypothesized and discussed, but as of a couple weeks ago, we have found where different open source intelligence companies and everything are actually tracking Cobalt Strike licenses by that identifier that we mentioned. So you can go out to, I think it's like ThreatFox or something, and type in what they call a watermark or the license ID, and then you can track that beacon and where it's going across. Okay, so kind of going through some of our impactful findings. Obviously, as we mentioned a lot, you can extract out potentially sensitive information depending on how you have your C2 set up. So the biggest piece besides the operational tracking with the license identifier, I would say, is where you're calling back to. Again, co-opting, kind of tracking where you're coming from, whether you're coming from like a Cloudflare or maybe your own IP space, which wouldn't be great. So there are those OPSEC concerns that are, something that teams need to be aware of. Untrained defenders, always an issue, whether it's they get trained a certain way in commercial and that just doesn't work translate well to government space, or, just a lack of training in general. So, kind of advising them to, hey, maybe search the hash and not upload the file directly to VirusTotal. And then, obviously on both sides, red team, blue team, the resources, the manning, training, equipment, et cetera, could be, ebbs and flows, right? So at some points in time, they may have inadequate resources to kind of field these things and take care of it. So this is one of the examples of the impactful findings. This is from Cobalt Strike's SSH payload. And I don't know if everyone can read it, but by default, if you're not paying attention, it says, I paid for threat intel and all I got was this default IOC. So it's a good indicator that if you're not being careful, this is what's out there that defenders can find, defenders can see, that the red teams may not be aware of. And then in this case, also, this is output from our script that we developed from that same SSH beacon. If you see the first green box there, the SSH username and password are in plain text, in memory. So if a defender were to upload that, you're potentially exposing usernames and passwords to mission critical systems out on the internet for everyone to see. The second green box, we can see the watermark. So that's a case of that identifier that we mentioned, which identifies that as your licensed copy of Cobalt Strike. And then in this case, the SSH banner, this was a case where we were doing some testing with modifying that value. So this gets rid of the default IOC and sets it to something that looks more legitimate.
But no matter what you do with that, you're going to have the credentials in an SSH beacon.
Yeah, we haven't found a way to obfuscate that at all. So that is always, as of right now, in clear text from our understanding.
As part of doing this research, we presented a huge deep dive. I think we talked for like an hour and a half at the DoD Red Team Huddle in December last year. We've also given this same talk at the Cyber DT cross-service working group. So we're trying to get the information out there, but still have a little bit of a limited release on who has the full details and everything. We've also done some follow-on research with collaborating with the red teams to have them send us some of their Cobalt Strike payloads. Say, hey, how are you building your Cobalt Strike beacons that you're uploading to targets on DoD systems? Send us one of those or two of those or whatever, and let us look at them and see, what it takes to get into them now that we know how to do it on an unprotected one. So as we keep, continuing this research and talking about it with people and collaborating with other teams, we want to continue helping red teams make informed risk decisions and OPSEC decisions. And we're working on kind of a general set of recommendations that we can pass to the red teams to say, hey, here's how you can protect your beacons or best practices for those OPSEC things. But at the end of the day, again, that information is going to be out there in some form or fashion. So you're never going to be able to not have it. It's just about accepting some amount of risk. For more, if you want the full report, it's like 60 pages or something, the full technical breakdown of all this. You can reach out to Ozzy, whose name I'm sure you've seen a few times this week, as our ACO lead, and we're more than happy to sit down and talk about this and get like really deep in the weeds and into the hex and whatever with it, because that's what we do on a daily basis.
Yeah, and then I don't know how much time we have for questions left with our time. 1 minute?
1 minute.
Okay, so 1 minute. If you have questions outside of this, we'll be outside the room and we can answer and everything. So, any questions?
Good comment. I think this work is awesome. I think red teamers helping out the blue team a little bit, while also helping out your red team folks, saying, hey, they can see this, while also telling the blue teams, hey, by the way, you can see this. I think it's great for the community. Every time I had a question, it was answered on the next slide about how you help the other side. So I have no questions about that. It was a great presentation.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, we feel the same way, and I think that for a long time, especially folks that have been around for a while, will remember, days of red team where the red team would come in and kick people in the teeth and then laugh at them and leave, right? We're I think a kinder, gentler red team in a lot of ways. In that, I preface by saying we are not a certified red team, but as part of the red team community, our goal is that collaboration. One team, one fight, right? And the more we can do to help the defenders, the better we're making networks. And yeah, we're making our jobs harder, and we're driving, but that then forces the red teams to be better, which forces the blue teams to be better. And it's a process. So we really try to lean into that collaboration and do a lot of as much as we can, like purple team events and data sharing, whatever we can do to try to help everybody. Because again, we're all in this together.
Perfect. Thank you.